Imagine this an object 10 to 12 billion years old. Yes, you read that right. According to a recent release of data buried deep in a preprint server, 3 Atlas, one of the most mysterious objects in our solar system, is older than we could have ever imagined. This isn't some ancient asteroid or comet from the dawn of the solar system. We're talking about a body that predates even the formation of our sun. To put this in perspective, the age of the universe is 13.8 billion years, and 3I Atlas is only a few billion years shy of that. It's nearly as old as time itself. But here's the catch. It's been silently passing through space for all these years, unnoticed by many until recently. Just 2 days ago, Atlas made a remarkable maneuver, passing within 100,000 kilometers of Jupiter's gravitational boundary. And in a way that's almost too precise to be natural, it used Jupiter's gravity to accelerate and shoot off into the vastness of space. It was a perfect gravity assist, something spacecraft like Voyager and New Horizons rely on to travel vast distances. However, here's where it gets interesting. There was no intercept mission, no press release from NASA or the European Space Agency, ESA, and certainly no formal explanation for what happened. Instead, the mainstream narrative has downplayed it as nothing more than a comet, a simple, natural flyby. But when you take a closer look at the data that's been quietly released over the past few days, you'll see that the explanation doesn't quite hold up. The real story is much more complex, and to be honest, it's rather disturbing. The trajectory data from the Minor Planet Center shows something remarkable. On March 22nd, 3I Atlas executed a gravitational slingshot maneuver around Jupiter. But this wasn't some random event. It was deliberate, calculated, and almost too precise to be the result of chance. The object came in at a certain velocity, interacted with Jupiter's gravitational field from a precise distance of 53.6 million kilometers, a calculated 100,000 kilometers inside Jupiter's Hill sphere. And it left at 60 km faster than it arrived. That's not just a coincidence, that's a powered assist, a technique used in spacecraft design to accelerate objects. Human-made spacecraft do this all the time when they travel through the solar system, using the gravity of planets to gain speed and change their trajectory. But this is something we have never seen in nature before. The object didn't just pass by, it used Jupiter's gravity to accelerate itself in a way that seems almost engineered. Now, why are NASA and the ESA staying quiet about this? Why are they not making a big deal out of this extraordinary event? It's because the data doesn't fit the natural explanation they've been telling us all along. What they found does not match any category of object or event we currently understand. For the first time, we are looking at evidence that something more advanced might be out there. Something far more deliberate and intentional than we could have imagined. The data that was released quietly over the last few days, peer-reviewed preprint data, mission logs, and spectral analysis, tells a story that the mainstream agencies aren't talking about. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. When you dig deeper, you'll find that the evidence strongly suggests that Atlas isn't just a comet. It's something far more mysterious, something that we need to understand. What you're about to hear will change everything we think we know about our solar system. and potentially even about our place in the universe. But before we get to the specifics, let's first take a look at the most shocking part of the data: the age of the object. This discovery could not have come at a better time, because it's only after examining the details that the picture begins to shift. Something big happened on March 22nd, and what the scientists didn't openly discuss is just as important as what they did. But let's get into it. Let's begin with the first revelation, the age of Atlas. On March 23rd, a preprint study published on Research Square, an open access platform for peer-reviewed science, analyzed spectral data from the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST. The study, which took place shortly after Atlas passed perihelion, revealed something that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The study examined deuterium ratios and carbon isotopes, essential markers used to determine the age and composition of celestial objects. And what did the team find? This object formed in a cold, metal-poor environment, colder than 30 Kelvin. These are the conditions of the early universe, before our sun had even formed, and before Earth had the necessary material to start building up. Atlas had been traveling through space for an astounding 10 to 12 billion years. Essentially, it's as old as the formation of the Milky Way. Now, let's stop and consider the implications of this. The universe itself is 13.8 billion years old, and this object is nearly as old as the cosmos itself. If Atlas is truly 10 billion years old, it has survived cosmic ray bombardment for 10 billion years. It's endured extreme temperature fluctuations from the coldest parts of space at 3 Kelvin to the fiery heat of solar perihelion temperatures. It has been subjected to gravitational influences from passing stars, and yet, remarkably, its structural integrity has remained intact. For any organic molecules or complex chemical structures to survive such an extraordinary journey, they would need to be shielded, insulated from the harsh cosmic environment. And here's the clincher: to survive this long in such a harsh environment, Atlas would have to have been shielded under at least 10 meters of material. That is no accident. That's not a random occurrence, it's a deliberate protective shell. And that, my friends, is where the mystery really begins. If this object has been floating through space for 10 billion years, it raises the question, how could it have traveled this entire time without significant degradation? And why, after all this time, is it still in such a pristine state? The only reasonable explanation is that this object was intentionally shielded, protected by a layer of material that, as we'll see, may not have been a natural feature. This protective shell is just one of the many strange characteristics of Atlas. It is not just a relic from the past. It's a living mystery, a puzzle that doesn't quite fit into any natural explanation we've been offered. The age data raises another compelling question. If this object is indeed that old, where did it come from? What was its journey through the cosmos before it arrived in our solar system? And how is it possible for an object of this age, this complexity, to have remained hidden for so long? All these questions point to a deeper mystery, one that we have yet to fully unravel. Now, let's talk about the chemistry of Atlas, because what scientists have found in this area is just as perplexing. Before Atlas reached perihelion, scientists conducted spectral analysis of the gas cloud surrounding the object. And what they discovered was extraordinary. Atlas contained nickel. Not just traces of nickel, but significant concentrations of it. This was the first real anomaly. In natural comets, when nickel is detected, it usually appears in trace amounts, and when it does, it's typically in a ratio with iron that mirrors the primordial composition of the early solar system. However, what the team found around Atlas was something completely different. The nickel-to-iron ratio found on Atlas didn't match anything that could be considered natural. In fact, the ratio of nickel to iron in Atlas was highly unusual, and it was closer to the proportions found in industrial nickel alloys, materials that have been refined and processed by human hands. This is the second red flag. How could a 10-billion-year-old object formed in the cold, metal, poor environment of the early Milky Way end up with a higher concentration of nickel than iron, especially when the early universe had not yet been enriched with the metals created by stellar nucleosynthesis? The early Milky Way was lacking in heavy metals like iron and nickel. So, if Atlas formed in such an environment, these metals shouldn't be there, at least not in the concentrations that we're seeing. This inconsistency has led to a significant puzzle. Either the isotope data that suggests Atlas is 10 billion years old is wrong, or the nickel was not part of the original material of the object. It was added later, after the object had formed. The idea that Atlas might have been modified or altered in some way after its formation makes perfect sense in light of the other evidence we're gathering. Atlas chemistry doesn't fit the traditional narrative of a natural object. It suggests something far more deliberate, and again, we're left with the question: who or what was responsible for adding this nickel to the object's composition, and why? But this isn't the only chemical mystery surrounding Atlas. There's another layer to this puzzle. It's organic molecules. The complex carbon-based molecules found on Atlas are just as perplexing. After perihelion, these organic compounds began to release from the object, triggered by the heat from the sun, to survive 10 billion years of cosmic ray exposure and extreme temperature fluctuations. These organic compounds must have been protected by a layer of shielding. It's almost as though Atlas was a sealed container, and the thermal cycling of the sun triggered the release of its contents in sequence methane, water, and eventually complex organic molecules. What does this tell us? It's as if Atlas had been frozen for billions of years, its molecules locked away in a shielded, sealed environment, only to be released at just the right moment, when the sun's heat provided the perfect trigger. This sequence of events doesn't fit the natural behavior of a comet or asteroid. It's far more controlled. It's like Atlas is a mechanism, and the release of its contents is too structured to be the result of random cosmic forces. So, what do we make of all this? We have a 10 billion year old object with a protective shell, carrying complex organic molecules and containing refined nickel alloys. These are not the characteristics of a natural comet. They point to something far more deliberate, something that's designed, engineered, something we have yet to fully comprehend. The more we learn about Atlas, the less it seems to fit the natural explanations we've been given. There's a mystery here, and it's one that's only just beginning to unfold. Now, let's dive into the most perplexing aspect of this journey: the precision of Atlas trajectory. The trajectory data published by the Minor Planet Center tells us something that the mainstream narrative isn't addressing. On March 22th, 3 Atlas passed very close to Jupiter at a distance of 53.6 million kilometers. But here's the kicker: this wasn't a random distance. The region around Jupiter, known as the Hill sphere, is where the planet's gravitational pull dominates over the Sun's. The Hill sphere extends to about 53.5 million kilometers, and Atlas passed 100,000 kilometers inside that boundary. This isn't just close, it's incredibly close for a flyby. Jupiter's gravity is powerful enough to influence the trajectory of any object that passes too close, and Atlas did just that. But the key here is that Atlas didn't simply pass by Jupiter. It used Jupiter's gravity to accelerate, to change its velocity. That's a gravity assist, a technique that's been used by many spacecraft to travel faster and farther across the solar system. The fact that Atlas executed this maneuver on its outbound leg rather than its inbound leg makes it even more compelling. Usually, spacecraft plan these gravity assists on their way in to slow down or to change direction. But Atlas didn't need to slow down. It needed to accelerate, and that's exactly what it did. It wasn't just a random event. This was a precision maneuver executed with perfect timing. The outbound velocity increased by 60 km/s, faster than the approach velocity, and this increase is not something you can explain with random outgassing or simple gravitational interaction. It's deliberate, controlled. And when you look at the trajectory of Atlas, you see that the forces that pushed it off its ballistic path weren't just random forces. They were controlled and applied at precisely the right moment. These weren't the actions of a natural object. They were the actions of something that had been directed. But this isn't the end of the anomalies. There's another piece of this puzzle that's been largely ignored: the magnetic anomaly recorded by NASA's Juno spacecraft. At exactly 13:47 UTC, just 13 minutes before Atlas reached closest approach, Juno, an orbiter that's been studying Jupiter for over a decade, went into safe mode. Now, Juno has been through many radiation storms and extreme conditions, but it has never entered safe mode unexpectedly. Safe mode is an emergency response when systems detect a problem and shut down to await instructions from mission control. The telemetry log, which was published briefly before being updated, showed something very specific: a magnetic field anomaly in Jupiter's magnetosphere. This was a localized distortion, unlike anything that's been seen before. The anomaly was so significant that it triggered Juno to enter safe mode. But here's where it gets even stranger. The original log, which was briefly visible, indicated that this anomaly was inconsistent with the known flux tube dynamics of Jupiter's magnetosphere. That's crucial information, but by 2100 UTC, that specific line of data was removed from the log. It's as if someone didn't want us to know what had actually happened. And when Juno came back online, the official statement was vague. It simply stated that on-board fault protection had been triggered without providing any details or analysis. And just like that, the anomaly vanished. But the mysteries don't stop with Juno. There's more: the sudden silence from Jupiter's radio observatories. For 3 full days, between March 19th and March 20 data from Jupiter's radio observatories, including NASA's Radio Jove project, the NANC Geometric Array, and the University of Florida's Inspire database, all went completely silent. This is unprecedented. Jupiter is known for its constant radio emissions caused by charged particles spiraling along its magnetic field lines. These emissions are regular and predictable. Yet, during this critical period, the data completely stopped. When it resumed on March 19th, there was no explanation for the 3-day gap. No technical errors were reported, and there was no acknowledgement of what had caused the missing data. It was as if the entire monitoring system just went dark. At the same time, the European Space Agency, ESA, released a vague statement on March 17th. They claimed that due to the proximity of Atlas to Jupiter's glare, optical observations were not possible during the flyby. But this explanation doesn't hold up. JWST has observed objects even closer to Jupiter, and there are coronagraphs specifically designed to block out the sun's glare. If those instruments can observe objects near Jupiter, then why couldn't they have observed Atlas? This excuse doesn't work. Here's where it gets even more curious. While ESA was releasing vague statements, data started appearing from smaller teams and independent researchers. The Research Square preprint, which gave us the age data, and papers on the metallic absorption lines were all released by independent scientists, not the big agencies. The data from these smaller teams told a story that the official agencies weren't sharing. Data on the object's age, its chemistry, and its precise trajectory was being quietly published, but none of it was coming from the major space agencies like NASA or ESA. The fragmentation of this data raises serious questions. If Atlas were just a comet, as we've been told, why are independent researchers able to piece together this information while the major agencies remain silent? Why are the data points being released in such a disconnected and piecemeal manner? This pattern is anything but normal. When major discoveries are made, they are typically announced in a coordinated, transparent way with data released openly. But with Atlas, the data has been fragmented and scattered across preprint servers, university archives, and minor observatories. And this selective publication is exactly what we'd expect to see in a controlled narrative. Someone is managing the release of this information, and not in a way that benefits the public's understanding. So, where are we now? We have trajectory data showing that Atlas used Jupiter for a gravity assist. We have Juno going into safe mode due to a magnetic anomaly that wasn't explained. We have radio observatories going silent for 3 days. We have the ESA offering vague statements, while independent researchers publish key findings. All of these data points are scattered across different sources, but nobody is piecing them together into a cohesive narrative. Why? It seems clear that something significant happened, something that no one is ready to fully disclose just yet. The data exists, but it's being hidden, fragmented, and quietly published across various channels. And the reason is simple: the story is not finished yet.